My name is Clara Williams. I am 25 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have carried the heavy weight of being the overlooked daughter in my family. Still, despite years of favoritism and dismissive glances, I fought to build something that was mine and mine alone. That something was my car. Not just any car, but the car I had saved for since I was a teenager working part-time jobs, the car that represented freedom from the constant shadow of my older sister Lauren and from the suffocating control of my parents. When I finally bought it, polished it, and felt the engine rumble beneath my hands, I told myself that no one could take it away from me. I believed it was untouchable. I was wrong. The night that changed everything began like any other argument with Lauren. We had fought about the car before, but this time it was different. I had parked in front of our house after work, tired and desperate for peace. Lauren came storming out the front door, her face twisted in anger, demanding the keys yet again. I refused. She screamed that I thought I was better than her, that I flaunted my independence. I turned my back to her thinking the fight was over, but I heard the driver's side door slam and the sound of the ignition roaring to life. My heart stopped. I spun around just in time to see the headlights blind me. My sister was behind the wheel of my own car, her foot pressed on the accelerator. In a split second, I realized she was not joking, not pretending, but actually aiming straight at me. The sound of tires screeching on pavement filled the air. My breath caught in my throat as I jumped out of the way, my body hitting the grass with a painful thud. The car missed me by inches. For a moment, the world froze. Neighbors opened their doors, their faces pale with confusion. I heard someone gasp. I felt the sting of dirt on my palms and the trembling in my legs as I pushed myself up. My sister sat in the car, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. But before I could even gather my voice, my parents rushed outside. I thought for a foolish second that they would finally defend me, finally see the truth. Instead, my mother shouted, "Clara, what did you do to her?" My father's voice followed heavy with disappointment. "You always provoke your sister. This is your fault." My heart sank deeper than it ever had. I had nearly been run over by my own sister with my own car, and the only words I heard from my parents were accusations. They did not ask if I was hurt. They did not ask what had really happened. They simply decided I was to blame as always. What they did not know was that my car had a secret of its own. Growing up in my family meant learning very early that love was not something given equally, but something measured and weighed, depending on who you were and how well you fit the roles my parents valued. My sister Lauren was 2 years older than me, and from the moment she was born, she was the golden child. My mother adored her delicate features and graceful movements, and my father saw her as the daughter who could do no wrong. When she wanted to take ballet lessons at 6 years old, my parents did not hesitate to pay for the most expensive studio in town, gushing about her potential as if she were destined for greatness. When I was 12 and asked if I could take an automotive workshop class because I loved the smell of oil and the sound of engines, my mother scoffed and said we could not afford frivolous hobbies that would not make me more feminine. That was the story of our childhood in a nutshell. Lauren got the designer dresses while I wore hand-me-downs. Lauren got celebrated birthdays while mine came with a small cake and a quiet sigh that I was always too difficult. Lauren got driving lessons at 16 with a car gifted to her while I was told I should focus on my grades and learn to be grateful. The divide was clear to everyone except my parents, who swore they loved us equally, even as they tilted every decision in her favor. I used to watch my father beam with pride at Lauren's recitals, while I sat quietly in the back row, covered in grease stains from fixing an old lawnmower I had dragged from the curb. My passion for machines and engines grew in the shadows of their disapproval. I felt alive when I was surrounded by bolts and tools, when I heard the roar of an engine that I had managed to bring back to life. But at home, that joy turned into shame because I knew the moment my mother saw the dirt on my hands, she would frown and remind me that no man would want a woman who looked like a mechanic. I learned to hide pieces of myself just to survive in that household. By the time I was 15, Lauren was the center of every family conversation while I became the reliable background character. If she cried, my mother rushed to comfort her. If she failed a test, my father blamed the teacher, but if I struggled, it was because I did not try hard enough. Even my achievements were twisted into reminders that I should be more like her. When I earned a scholarship, my father muttered that I should not expect praise because Lauren was facing more pressure than I ever would. It was as if my worth existed only in contrast to her and always on the losing side. The irony was that Lauren did not even value what she was given. She dropped out of ballet after 2 years, quit art classes after 3, lost interest in piano after 1. Every abandoned pursuit was excused as part of her sensitive nature, while I was constantly criticized for sticking with what they considered unfeminine. She coasted through high school on charm and favoritism while I buried myself in part-time jobs and late-night study sessions. The more they pushed her forward, the more I slipped into invisibility. But invisibility has a strange way of breeding resilience. I discovered that when no one believes in you, you have to believe in yourself twice as much. I saved every dollar from babysitting, from scrubbing dishes at diners, from tutoring neighborhood kids. I studied engineering books that were not even on my syllabus. I found mentors in unexpected places, older mechanics who let me stand in the corner of their shops just to watch them work. I built a world outside the suffocating walls of our home, a world where my curiosity and determination mattered. And yet, despite everything, I still craved recognition from my parents. I still longed for the day when they would look at me the way they looked at Lauren. That longing made their words cut deeper every time they dismissed me. I remember one particular dinner when I mentioned that my professor had praised a project I built from scratch. My mother glanced at Lauren and said, "Maybe you should give your sister some tips on how to be less rigid. She needs to be softer." My father nodded and said, "Clara, you have always been too harsh." In that moment, I understood that no matter what I did, I would never be enough. The favoritism was not about achievements, but about roles. Lauren was the cherished daughter because she fit their image. I was the outsider in my own family. This pattern continued even into adulthood. Lauren moved back home after college when she failed to keep a steady job. She spent her days complaining about stress while my parents coddled her with endless sympathy. I had moved out by then, working long hours at a garage, slowly building my independence, but whenever I visited, the air was the same heavy mix of judgment and dismissal. It was as if I had stepped into a theater where every character had their script memorized, Lauren as the victim, my parents as the protectors, and me as the villain who never measured up. Still, I kept visiting because deep down I thought maybe they would change, maybe they would finally acknowledge me. I wanted to believe that family meant something more than hierarchy and control. But every interaction reminded me of the truth I had learned as a child. In this family, love was conditional and always at my expense. Leaving home for college was both terrifying and liberating. I chose mechanical engineering not just because I loved machines, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could survive in a field where no one expected me to succeed. The transition was brutal. I had little money, almost no support, and every class demanded twice the effort just to stay afloat. While other students relaxed on weekends, I worked double shifts at a coffee shop and fixed cars in a friend's driveway to pay for textbooks. My meals were often sandwiches hastily packed from the cheapest groceries I could find. I remember staring at my bank account late at night, calculating every cent, knowing that one mistake could force me to drop out. Yet through the exhaustion, there was a quiet pride in knowing that each day I pushed through, I was building something of my own. My parents never asked how I was managing. When I called home, the questions were always about Lauren. She was struggling to keep up with her classes in art history. She was feeling anxious. She needed encouragement. Meanwhile, I was fighting to pass calculus exams and complete projects that required sleepless nights in the lab. But when I mentioned my work, my mother's voice always turned sharp. "Clara, you are wasting your youth," she said. "You should think about settling down, not burying yourself in grease and engines." I swallowed the words that burned on my tongue and learned to stop expecting approval. Instead, I channeled that hunger into discipline. I spent hours in the lab constructing prototypes, staying behind when others left, making sure every detail was perfect. Professors began to notice my dedication, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of validation outside the suffocating walls of my family home. My hard work paid off when I earned an internship at a well-known automotive company during my junior year. I threw myself into the role, eager to prove that I could belong in a world dominated by men and dismissive of outsiders. I learned quickly, stayed late, volunteered for difficult assignments. By the end of the summer, my supervisor told me he saw leadership potential in me. That was the first time anyone had ever said those words to me. When I shared the news with my parents, my father shrugged and asked how Lauren was doing with her part-time job at the bookstore. It stung, but I had already learned that their indifference no longer defined my worth. After graduation, I returned to the city with a job offer at a mid-sized engineering firm. The pay was modest, but enough to live independently. I rented a small apartment shared with 2 roommates and continued working on cars during weekends. Every dollar I saved was for one dream. For years, I had carried a promise to myself that I would buy a car that reflected all my sacrifices. Not just transportation, but a symbol of freedom, independence, and resilience. I scoured online listings, attended auctions, and kept a careful record of my growing savings. Each time I resisted the urge to spend on clothes or vacations like my peers, I imagined the moment I would hold the keys to my own car. 5 years of 70-hour work weeks, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices led to the day I had been waiting for. I found it through a collector who was downsizing. It was not the fanciest model in the world, but to me, it was perfect. A sleek, modern car with a powerful engine and smooth lines, the kind of machine that made my pulse quicken. The price was steep, every penny I had saved, but when I slid into the driver's seat for the first time and felt the leather beneath my fingers, I knew it was worth every sacrifice. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered to myself, "This is mine. No one can take this from me." Driving that car home was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. For once, I felt connected not to my family's endless criticisms, but to my own strength. That car represented late-night studying until my eyes burned double shifts that left me too tired to stand, and the countless times I swallowed tears alone in my dorm room. It was the physical embodiment of every obstacle I had overcome. Owning it gave me a sense of pride I had never known before. People around me noticed too. My colleagues asked about it, impressed that someone so young had managed to afford such a vehicle without debt. My neighbors admired it when I parked on the street. It was not about their praise, though. It was about finally having something no one else could claim credit for. I protected it fiercely, washing it regularly, learning every detail about its mechanics, treating it with reverence. It became my sanctuary, the one place where I could breathe without judgment. Of course, when my parents and Lauren saw it for the first time, their reactions followed the same script as always. My father shook his head and muttered that it was excessive. My mother said it was unladylike to care so much about cars. Lauren smirked and said I was showing off. But beneath her mocking tone, I saw something else in her eyes. Envy. For once, I had something she could not easily claim, and she hated that. From that moment, the car became more than just a symbol of independence. It became the wedge that deepened the rift in our family. Lauren began asking to borrow it, pretending it was harmless. My parents pressured me to share. Each time I refused, the tension grew. But I held firm because I knew what that car meant to me. It was not just a vehicle. It was my history, my sacrifice, and my future. And I was determined not to let anyone take it from me. Owning my car changed the way I carried myself. For the first time in my life, I felt I had something that proved my worth without needing my parents' approval. But that sense of peace did not last long because Lauren could not stand the fact that I had achieved something on my own. At first, she pretended it was harmless curiosity, asking questions about how the engine worked or what it felt like to drive on the highway. Soon, her questions turned into demands. She wanted to borrow it for errands, then for nights out with her friends, then for entire weekends. Each time I told her no, her face twisted with resentment. My parents always came to her defense. They told me I was selfish and accused me of caring more about a machine than my own sister. I reminded them how much I had worked to earn it, how much it meant to me, but my words fell on deaf ears. The more I refused, the more aggressive their pressure became. My mother would sigh dramatically at dinner and say, "Clara, why do you always make everything so difficult? Your sister just wants to enjoy life a little." My father would shake his head and mutter that I had always been too rigid, too cold. Lauren thrived in this environment because she knew their words would wear me down. She played the victim perfectly, claiming she was stressed at work, that she needed an escape, that I was cruel for denying her one small happiness. Every time she said of those things, I felt the old ache in my chest, the same ache I had carried since childhood, when my needs were always dismissed. But this time, I refused to bend. The car was mine, and I would not allow anyone to take it away from me. Lauren's frustration grew until it boiled over into open hostility. She began mocking me in front of relatives, telling them that I thought I was superior because I drove an expensive car. She hinted that I must have had help from a man, that there was no way I could afford it on my own. My parents never corrected her. In fact, they seemed to enjoy letting those lies hang in the air, as if they explained away my achievement. The tension reached a breaking point one weekend when I returned home for a family dinner. I had parked in the driveway and locked the car before going inside. Lauren immediately asked for the keys. When I said no, she slammed her hands on the table so hard the plates rattled. My mother scolded me in front of everyone, saying, "Clara, why can you not be generous? Look at your sister. She has been through so much." I wanted to scream that I had been through just as much, if not more, but I bit my tongue because I knew it would only turn into another shouting match where I would be painted as the aggressor. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I could feel the walls of the house closing in on me, suffocating me with memories of years when my voice never mattered. I realized that Lauren's obsession with the car was not just about envy. It was about control. She could not stand that I had something that symbolized independence, something she could not claim as her own. My parents reinforced that control every time they took her side, reminding me that in their eyes, I was still the expendable daughter. The next morning, I found scratches along the side of the car. My stomach dropped. I knew it was Lauren. When I confronted her, she smirked and said, "Maybe if you let me drive it, I would take better care of it." My parents dismissed it as childish squabbling. My father said, "You are both adults, work it out yourselves." My mother insisted I was being dramatic. Their refusal to acknowledge the truth only fueled Lauren's behavior. I began to fear what she might do next. She had already crossed lines before, but this felt different. There was a wildness in her eyes, a desperation I could not ignore. I started to park my car blocks away from the house when I visited, hoping to keep it out of her reach. But deep down, I knew this was only delaying the inevitable. The tension was building towards something I could not stop. I just did not know how far she was willing to go. The breaking point arrived on a humid summer evening after I finished a grueling shift at the garage. My hands still smelled of engine oil as I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house for Sunday dinner. I was exhausted but determined not to let the usual tension ruin the evening. As I stepped inside, I immediately sensed the storm brewing. Lauren was already pacing in the living room, her voice rising as she complained about how unfair life was and how much pressure she was under. My parents sat on the couch, nodding sympathetically as if her every word were gospel. I set down my bag and tried to disappear into the background, but the moment she saw me, she turned her fury toward me. She demanded the keys to my car, claiming she needed it to clear her head. I refused, calmly but firmly. Her face flushed red with rage. "You think you are better than me, Clara," she shouted. "You think this car makes you important." I tried to keep my composure and told her again that the car was mine and she had no right to touch it. My parents immediately jumped to her defense. My mother wagged her finger at me, saying, "Clara, stop being so selfish. Your sister is struggling. Show her some compassion." My father added that I always created conflict and that I should let Lauren have her way for once. Their words felt like knives carving into the old wounds I had carried since childhood, but this time I stood my ground. "No," I said, "enough." Lauren's eyes darkened with something I had never seen before. Without another word, she stormed outside. At first, I thought she was simply retreating to sulk, but then I heard the sound of my car doors unlocking and the engine roaring to life. My heart froze. I rushed out the door just in time to see her behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped it tightly. "Clara, move!" she screamed, her voice unhinged. I stood in the driveway, stunned. For a split second, I thought she was bluffing, but then the headlights blazed and the tires screeched against the pavement. She was actually aiming at me. Time slowed. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I dove to the side, landing hard on the grass. The car shot past where I had been standing, barely missing me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I scrambled to my feet, trembling uncontrollably. Neighbors opened their doors at the sound of the commotion, their shocked faces lit by the glow of the street lamps. I heard someone shout, "Did she just try to run you over?" I wanted to answer, but my throat was locked. I turned toward the house, praying my parents had seen what happened. They had come out onto the porch, their faces pale, but instead of rushing to me, they rushed to Lauren. My mother cried out, "Lauren, are you all right?" as if she had been the victim. My father glared at me, and his voice was sharp with anger. "Clara, what did you do? You know how sensitive your sister is." My mouth fell open in disbelief. I pointed toward the car, my voice shaking. "She tried to kill me. She tried to hit me with my own car." But my parents were unmoved. My mother insisted I must have provoked her. My father muttered that I always escalated things. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. I felt exposed, humiliated, and betrayed all over again. My legs trembled so badly I could barely stand. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Lauren finally stepped out of the car, her face twisted with triumph. She pointed at me and said, "You are crazy. Everyone knows you are the problem, Clara." For a moment, I thought my body would collapse under the weight of despair, but somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance flickered. I knew what I had seen. I knew what she had done, and I also knew something my family had forgotten. That car had a secret. In the hours that followed the incident, I felt myself unraveling piece by piece. My body still trembled from the near collision, and my mind could not stop replaying the moment the headlights bore down on me. I had come within inches of being crushed beneath my own car, driven by the sister I had grown up with, and yet the people who should have protected me chose to protect her instead. Back inside the house, my parents scolded me as if I had committed the crime. My mother folded her arms and told me I should apologize for provoking Lauren. My father muttered that I was dramatic and ungrateful. Their words bounced around the walls of my skull, leaving me lightheaded and disoriented. I wanted to scream that I was the victim, that I had nearly died, but the moment I opened my mouth, their eyes filled with disdain. The message was clear. In their world, I was not allowed to be a victim. I was only allowed to be the problem. After hours of arguing, I gave up. My voice was hoarse, my chest tight. I retreated to the small guest room that used to be mine and collapsed on the bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling with tears sliding silently down my cheeks. Every muscle in my body ached, but the pain in my chest was worse. It was the familiar ache of invisibility, magnified 100 times. For years, I had told myself that one day my parents would see me, but that night, I finally accepted the truth. They never would. They had chosen Lauren as their fragile saint, and I would forever be the scapegoat. The realization crushed me. I did not sleep. When dawn broke, I gathered my things and left without saying goodbye. I drove back to my apartment in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Each mile put distance between me and the house, but it did not put distance between me and the despair. I arrived home and sat in the car long after I had parked, unable to move. The image of Lauren's smirk haunted me. The sound of my parents blaming me echoed in my head. I felt trapped in a nightmare where truth did not matter and my pain was invisible. In the days that followed, isolation wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I stopped answering calls. I avoided friends. At work, I put on a mask of normalcy, but inside, I was hollow. I questioned my sanity. Had it really happened the way I remembered? Was I exaggerating? My parents' voices replayed so often that I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I had pushed her too far. The self-doubt ate away at me until I barely recognized myself. Nights were the worst. I lay awake, hearing the phantom screech of tires, the phantom rush of air as the car nearly struck me. My heart would race, my body would shake, and I would curl into myself until exhaustion finally dragged me into restless dreams. Loneliness became my constant companion. I wanted to reach out to someone, anyone, but shame kept my mouth shut. I was afraid people would not believe me just as my parents had not believed me. That fear silenced me more effectively than any locked door. Yet even in the depths of despair, a small part of me refused to surrender. I kept thinking about the moment I had remembered in the driveway, the secret of the car, the security system I had installed with cameras that recorded every drive, every ignition, every movement. Somewhere on that device, the truth was waiting. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. I was not crazy. I was not imagining. The evidence existed. I just had to find the strength to bring it to light. The turning point came one sleepless night when I sat in my apartment staring at the small black box connected to my car's security system. My hands shook as I reached for it, afraid of what I might see, yet desperate for confirmation that I was not losing my mind. I connected it to my laptop, my breath shallow as the files loaded, the screen filled with folders, each stamped with dates and times. My pulse quickened as I scrolled to the night of the incident. With trembling fingers, I clicked play. The footage opened with the quiet image of me walking toward the house, tired and unaware of what was about to unfold. Then came Lauren storming out, her expression twisted with rage. The camera mounted on the dashboard captured her jerking the door open and sliding into the driver's seat. I watched myself spin around as the headlights blazed. I watched as the car lurched forward, the tires screeching, the vehicle aimed straight at my body. My stomach clenched as I relived the terror, but this time I also felt a surge of vindication. The footage showed clearly that I was standing still when she accelerated. It showed my desperate leap out of the way. It showed her slamming the brakes only after I had already fallen into the grass. The evidence was undeniable. My parents could argue, they could dismiss, but the truth was right there in pixels and sound. My hands covered my mouth as sobs broke free, not from sadness this time, but from relief. I was not crazy. I had proof. The following days, I carried the footage on a flash drive like a weapon hidden in plain sight. Every time my parents called to insist I apologize to Lauren, I clenched the drive in my pocket and said nothing. Their words no longer pierced me the same way. I had something stronger than their gaslighting. Still, I hesitated. Exposing the truth meant war. I knew my parents would not forgive me for shattering their illusion of Lauren as the fragile angel. I knew Lauren would come after me with more venom than ever before. Fear battled with fury inside me. Fear told me to hide the footage and protect myself from further conflict. Fury told me to unleash it and finally force them to face reality. For days, I lived in that limbo until one Sunday evening the decision was made for me. My parents invited me again for dinner, and I went determined to keep the peace. But no sooner had I stepped through the door than Lauren smirked and said in front of everyone, "Clara has been telling people I tried to hurt her. Can you believe it? She is delusional." My parents shook their heads in unison. "My father told me I was damaging the family with lies." My mother sighed as though she pitied me for being so unstable. My chest burned with fury. I reached into my bag, pulled out the flash drive, and set it on the table. "Watch it," I said. My voice shaking but steady. "Watch the truth." The room fell silent. My father looked at me with disdain. My mother with disbelief. Lauren with sudden panic. She tried to laugh it off, but her eyes betrayed her fear. That was when I knew. The footage was no longer just my lifeline. It was my weapon, my shield, my chance to reclaim the narrative that had been stolen from me since childhood. The room held its breath as the flash drive sat on the dining table, gleaming under the light like a silent bomb ready to detonate. My parents stared at it with suspicion, while Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her forced smile betraying the crack in her confidence. My father finally scoffed and said, "Clara, this is ridiculous. We do not need to see whatever fantasy you have conjured up." My mother nodded, adding, "You are only making things worse by holding on to grudges." But I was done being dismissed. With steady hands, I took the flash drive and walked to the television in the living room where I connected it. My voice trembled, but my resolve did not waver. "If you are so sure I am lying, then you will have no problem watching this." Lauren stood abruptly and snapped, "Do not play that." Her voice carried a sharpness that sliced through the air. My parents looked at her confused. "Why not Lauren?" my father asked. "What could possibly be wrong with seeing what happened?" She faltered for a moment, then crossed her arms, trying to recover her composure. "Because it is stupid," she muttered, but it was too late. The footage began to play. The living room filled with the sound of the car engine roaring to life. On the screen, my exhausted figure walked toward the house. Then Lauren appeared, her face contorted with rage as she slid into the driver's seat. The headlights blazed and the car lurched forward, aimed directly at me. The sound of screeching tires filled the room, followed by the sight of my body diving onto the grass to avoid being struck. Gasps erupted from the relatives who had gathered for dinner. One aunt clutched her chest, another cousin covered his mouth in shock. The footage ended with Lauren stepping out of the car, her expression cold and unrepentant. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. I turned slowly toward my parents, my chest rising and falling with the weight of years of pain. "That is the truth," I said, my voice raw. "That is what happened." My mother's face went pale, her lips parted, but no words came out. My father shook his head as if refusing to process what his eyes had just seen. But the relatives had seen it too, and their murmurs filled the air. One uncle said clearly she tried to hit Clara. Another relative whispered, "This is attempted murder." The truth was undeniable, and for the first time in my life, I saw doubt flicker in my parents' eyes. Lauren exploded. She screamed at me, calling me a liar, even as the evidence contradicted her. She pointed at the screen and shouted that I had tampered with the footage, but her words rang hollow and everyone could see it. My mother finally whispered, "Lauren, tell me this is not true." Lauren's face twisted in desperation. She stomped her foot and cried out, "It is her fault. She pushed me to it. She makes me crazy." Her confession hung in the air, damning her more than any footage could. My father tried to defend her, muttering that she was under stress, that she did not mean it, but the tide had already turned. Relatives turned their gazes on him with disgust. One cousin asked, "How can you defend this?" Another aunt shook her head and said, "You have enabled her for too long." My parents' authority cracked that night in front of witnesses who could no longer ignore what they had seen. For years they had painted me as the troublemaker, but now the mask had shattered. Tears burned my eyes, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of release. For the first time, the truth was out, and no amount of denial could erase it. Lauren lunged toward me, but my cousin intercepted her, holding her back. Her screams echoed through the house like the final act of a tragedy. I stood firm, no longer shrinking under her rage. My father barked at everyone to calm down, but his voice had lost its power. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing not for me, but for the image of the perfect family that had just been destroyed. I let the silence that followed stretch because in that silence the weight of decades shifted. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the survivor who had brought the truth to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath began the moment the footage ended, and silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket, suffocating the last illusions of harmony. My relatives whispered among themselves, some glancing at me with pity, others glaring at my parents with anger. Lauren sat slumped in her chair, her hands trembling, her face pale, as if the reality of what she had done was finally sinking in. My parents still tried to salvage control, but their voices cracked under the weight of undeniable truth. My father demanded that everyone calm down, but the authority he once wielded had evaporated. My mother pleaded for understanding, insisting that Lauren had been under stress and that the family should not turn on itself, but no one listened. The spell of denial was broken. The next morning, I took the footage to the police station. My heart pounded as I handed the flash drive to the officer at the desk, but relief surged through me when he assured me that they would take it seriously. Within days, detectives interviewed me and several neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Their statements matched what the footage revealed. For once, the truth was not just my burden to carry, it was a matter of record. When the police came to question Lauren, she broke down screaming that I had ruined her life. She accused me of betrayal, as if she had not been the one who nearly ended mine. My parents stood by her side, refusing to cooperate, but their protests carried no weight against the evidence. The case moved quickly. Charges were filed for attempted assault with a deadly weapon. Court dates were set. The weeks that followed were a blur of anxiety and grim determination. At work, I forced myself to function, but every spare thought was consumed by the looming trial. Nights remained restless, filled with dreams of screeching tires and blinding headlights. Yet I also felt a strange strength building within me. For years, I had been silenced, dismissed, gaslighted by the very people who should have protected me. Now, the truth was louder than all their denials. The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, though my legs trembled beneath me. Lauren sat at the defense table, her face twisted in bitterness. My parents sat behind her, their eyes filled with hostility. I took the witness stand and told the court what had happened, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry the weight of my story. Then the footage played on the large screen for the judge and jury. Gasps filled the courtroom as they watched the scene unfold. The attempt on my life was undeniable. My parents averted their eyes, refusing to look, but the damage was done. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with their verdict. Guilty. Lauren's scream echoed through the chamber as the judge announced her sentence. She was led away in handcuffs, her defiance finally shattered. My parents rushed to her side, crying and shouting that the system was corrupt, that I had manipulated everyone. But their protests were drowned out by the gavel striking the bench. Justice had been served. The weeks after the trial were a mixture of liberation and mourning. I felt free from the shadow that had haunted me since childhood, yet I also grieved for the family I had lost, though in truth it had never truly been mine. My parents cut off all contact, blaming me for destroying their perfect image. Friends and coworkers who learned of the case offered support, but I struggled to accept it. Part of me still expected rejection, still braced for disbelief. Slowly, I allowed myself to breathe again. I began therapy and for the first time spoke openly about the years of gaslighting and emotional abuse. The therapist listened without judgment, validating the pain I had carried alone. Healing was not instant, but each session felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. Financially, the ordeal had drained me, but I pushed forward, determined to rebuild. I saved diligently, worked extra shifts, and focused on small goals like repairing the scratches Lauren had left on my car. Each repair felt symbolic, a restoration not just of metal, but of dignity. Some relatives who had seen the footage reached out apologizing for not recognizing the truth sooner. I accepted their words with caution, knowing that trust once broken could not easily be rebuilt. Yet I appreciated their willingness to see me differently. Others remained silent, unwilling to confront their own complicity. I let them fade from my life without regret. Standing in the quiet of my apartment one evening, I realized that although I had lost my family, I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained myself. I had stared into this face of violence and survived. I had faced betrayal and reclaimed my voice. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time, I felt strong enough to walk it alone. Looking back now, it feels surreal to think about how close I came to losing my life that night, and how close I came to losing myself completely in the years of gaslighting and blame that preceded it. For so long, I believed my worth was determined by the approval of my parents and the validation of a family that refused to see me. I begged for scraps of affection, twisted myself into shapes to fit the role they demanded, and blamed myself whenever I could not live up to their impossible expectations. But the night my sister tried to hit me with my own car became the dividing line between the person I used to be and the person I am now. That night forced me to confront the truth I had avoided for decades. My family was never going to choose me. They had already chosen their scapegoat and their golden child, and no amount of obedience or self-sacrifice would ever change that. Once I accepted that the grief was immense, but so was the freedom. I no longer needed to contort myself to win love that was conditional and manipulative. I no longer needed to silence my pain to maintain the illusion of family unity. I had the evidence, I had the truth, and for once, the world outside our house could see what I had always known. The trial was not just about convicting my sister, it was about exposing the entire structure of lies that had kept me trapped. When the verdict was read and the gavel came down, I felt something inside me unlock. It was not joy exactly, it was not even triumph. It was a profound sense of release, like chains falling away. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I had felt in years, even as my parents turned their backs on me with fury in their eyes. Their rejection still stung, but it no longer defined me. For the first time, I understood that their love had always been conditional, and that losing it was not the end of me, it was the beginning. Healing has not been simple. There are days when memories rise like ghosts, when I hear phantom headlights or feel phantom blame pressing down on me. There are nights when I wake drenched in sweat, reliving the moment of impact that never came. Trauma has a way of etching itself into the bones. But alongside the scars, there is resilience. Each time I get behind the wheel of my car and drive without fear, I reclaim a piece of the ground that was stolen from me. Each time I speak openly about my experience, I silence the voices that once insisted I stay quiet. I have learned to build boundaries and protect them fiercely. I have learned that family is not defined by blood, but by the people who show up for you in truth. Some of my friends have become closer than siblings, offering support without conditions. I have also found strength in others who have endured similar toxic families. Sharing our stories reminds me that I am not alone, that survival is possible, that justice, though imperfect, can still shine a light into the darkest corners. If there is one lesson I carry most deeply, it is that silence only protects the abuser. Speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes, is the most powerful act of resistance. I know now that my voice matters. I know now that my life has value regardless of whether my parents ever acknowledge it. My sister may sit behind bars blaming me for her downfall, but I no longer carry that weight. Her choices led her there, not mine. My parents may cling to their delusions, but their denial no longer cages me. I choose to live, to heal, to grow. Standing in my apartment today, I look at the car parked outside, and instead of fear, I feel gratitude. That car was almost my grave, but it also became my witness. It held the truth when no one else would, and in doing so, it gave me the weapon I needed to fight back. Sometimes healing begins in unexpected places. For me, it began in the hard drive of a machine designed only to record. Now it has expanded into every corner of my life. I am 25 years old, and for the first time, I feel like I am living my own story, not the distorted version my family tried to write for me. The road ahead is long and not without struggle, but it is mine, and I walk it with my head held high. To anyone who hears my story, I say this: do not doubt your own truth, even if the people closest to you refuse to see it. Evidence helps, but even without it, your pain is real, your experience is valid, and your survival is proof of your strength. Do not let them convince you otherwise. My story began with betrayal and violence, but it does not end there. It continues in the quiet resilience of everyday healing and the courage to build a future that no longer revolves around toxic approval. It continues in the choice to love myself fiercely, even when those who should have loved me first did not. And most of all, it continues in the knowledge that I am free.